Welcome to the Crimisphere. Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the Crimisphere, where we discuss crime and criminal behavior. If you want to support the channel and enjoy this type of content, the best way to support is to like the video and subscribe. Many thanks to returning subscribers. I appreciate you all. And for those who are new, I hope you enjoy the video and will consider subscribing. Now let's get started. For those who are too young to recall the classic action movie from 1982 called First Blood, that starred Sylvester Stallone, who played the fictional character John James Rambo. It is still one of my favorite action movies. It's the story of a Vietnam veteran that is profiled and harassed by small-town police officers. Rambo was in town to visit a former veteran. Before he could do that, he was picked up by police for vagrancy, which is like being charged for being homeless, and he was taken into custody. Now, while in custody, the police harassed him to the point that it triggered flashbacks of his time serving in the war in Vietnam, where he was tortured. Rambo beat up a bunch of cops and fled from police custody to begin an all-out assault on the police, who started a manhunt for him. I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it, but if you're into action movies, it's a classic. You have to check it out. But don't do that right now. For now, let's discuss the person that I refer to as Black Rambo, because the events that unfolded are reminiscences of things that are only seen in movies. 11 years ago, in February of 2013, Christopher Dorner launched what he said would be unconventional and asymmetrical warfare to those in LAPD uniform, whether on or off duty. Basically, he declared war on the Los Angeles Police Department. He made clear that family members of LAPD officers would also be targets. Who was Christopher Dorner? In his words, "I am an American by choice. I am a son. I am a brother. I am a military service member. I am a man who has lost complete faith in the system when the system betrayed, slandered, and libeled me." Christopher Jordan Dorner was born in New York on June 4th, 1979. However, he grew up in Cypress, which is in Southern California. Dorner recalled being the only Black kid in each of his elementary school classes from first grade to seventh grade. He found himself in more than a few schoolyard fights in response to fellow students provoking common childhood fights and for being called derogatory racial names. He recalled that African Americans made up less than 1% of the population at that time. And to add a fun fact, in 2023, the Census Bureau, quick facts, established the Black population in Cyprus, where he grew up, to be only 3.4%, which gives some credence to his recollection of things. It is clear early exposure to racism had a traumatic and lasting effect on Chris. He went on to graduate from Cypress High School in 1997. At some point while still a teen, he decided he wanted to one day become a police officer. He joined a youth program offered through the police department, which laid the foundation for what would later become a career in law enforcement. Meanwhile, Dorner went on to attend Southern Utah University. He majored in political science and minored in psychology. He was a running back for the university's football team from 1999 to 2000. The following year, Dorner successfully graduated in 2001. Remember, it was on September 11th of 2001, infamously named 9/11, that the Twin Towers fell after 2 aircraft were flown into them, which eventually kickstarted a war in the Middle East that turned into a 20-year war. On July 3rd of 2002, Chris Dorner became a commissioned United States Navy Reserve officer. A commissioned officer in the Navy Reserve is a member of the Navy Reserve who has completed officer training and has a degree from a 4-year college or university. They are a part of the Navy Reserve's leadership and management teams and can hold positions in many different career areas. Commissioned officers' responsibilities can range from low-level management to the highest levels of command. Dorner commanded a security unit at the Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada and served with the Mobile Inshore Undersea Warfare Unit from June of 2004 to February of 2006. In 2005, while still a Navy reservist, Chris joined the Los Angeles Police Department and entered the police academy. He graduated from the academy in 2006. His probationary officer duties with LAPD were put on pause when he was deployed to Bahrain with Coastal Riverine Group 2 from November of 2006 to April of 2007. For those who are geographically challenged like me, Bahrain is located between Saudi Arabia and Qatar. It's worth mentioning that neighbors describe Christopher Dorner as belonging to an admired, well-liked family and a man who usually kept to himself. In fact, it was reported that in 2002, as a student in the undergraduate pilot training program at Vance Air Force Base in Enid, Oklahoma, Dorner and a classmate found a bank bag of money in the middle of the road with nearly $8,000. The bag belonged to a local Korean church. A pastor had placed the bag on the roof of his car where it eventually fell off and into the road. Dorner and his classmate handed the money to police, and when asked why they returned it, Dorner said, "The military stresses integrity. There was a couple of $1,000, and if people are willing to give that to a church, it must be pretty important to them." He went on to explain how his mother taught him honesty and integrity. Dorner also said, "I didn't work for it, so it's not mine, and it was for the church."
Now in the search for this man who's coming after law enforcement officers like your son.
Well, yes, thank you. Initially, my thoughts and prayers are certainly for the families of those who've been victimized by these senseless acts. We're seeing this at all too great a frequency, and I find it very disheartening. Secondly, my concern is for my son and, of course, his colleagues and coworkers. But at the same time, I'm a woman of faith, and my faith sustains me in all things, and this is no different. One thing about faithful people, they're called to serve. And I think it's no surprise that my son would choose a career in law enforcement as a civil servant.
And, you know, I know as a mom, you are always concerned about him because he works for the LAPD. He's out on those mean streets on a daily basis. Now he's one of a number of officers that's a target, including families like yours. And I'm just curious, what's he saying to you? How is he telling you as a mom, don't worry about me?
Well, he does tend to reach out at times when he's particularly at risk, but he's trained, and he's well trained as an LAPD peace officer, and he fully understands the risk associated with this line of work. And again, when I was talking about service, it comes from a long line of civil servants, whether it's the military, healthcare, church ministry, and law enforcement. And he fully accepts, the risk associated with what he's doing. He has support, family support, and I think that's most important in times like this. My thoughts are for all of, again, his coworkers who are probably, obviously concerned about their welfare and that of the city.
Well, our heart is with you, and he's got you to keep inspiring him as well. You have each other, really. Really appreciate you calling in.
Absolutely.
Mom of LAPD officer, as this manhunt is underway for a former cop who says he wants to go after every law enforcement officer in the state of California.
As a reservist, Chris received multiple awards and decorations such as the National Defense Service Medal, the Iraq Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Sea Service Deployment Medal, Navy Marine Corps Overseas Service Ribbon, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with M device, Rifle Marksman Ribbon, and Pistol Expert Medal. In July of 2007, Dorner returned from his 13-month deployment in Bahrain and rejoined the LAPD to continue his mandatory probation year training. He was paired with training officer Teresa Evans in San Pedro. Before we move on to what I would consider the tipping point, I have to let you know that there's a lot of details involved in this series of events. I mean, the video would be far longer if I included every detail. So I tried to focus on the critical moments that I believe lit a fire to the mounting powder keg inside of Christopher Dorner. As usual, I have included links to my sources in the description box for those wishing to read more into the events and details in this video. On July 28th of 2007, Christopher Dorner and Teresa Evans, his training officer, were dispatched to a report of a man who refused to leave the DoubleTree Hotel. The Los Angeles Daily News reported the officers were called because a scruffy, angry, mentally ill man would not leave the premises. The man was later identified as Christopher Gettler. The officers wrestled with Gettler in a bush, which resulted in Evans using Dorner's taser gun to control Gettler. So it sounds like he was tasered twice. It's important to include here that Christopher Gettler suffers from schizophrenia and severe dementia. A couple of weeks after this incident, Evans submitted an evaluation report on Dorner where she harshly criticized Dorner and included a list of areas in which she thought he needed improvement. The areas were, number 1, the time it took to write reports, number 2, officer safety, and number 3, use of common sense and good judgment. Personally, that third category sounds very subjective and made clear to me why many called the evaluation harsh. One article said it was a day after the evaluation. I believe another article said around the same time. So I'm using both language because it may or may not matter to you when you're analyzing the events that unfold later. So around the same time Teresa Evans submitted the harsh evaluation on Dorner, Christopher Dorner called LAPD Sergeant Leonard Perez, whom he knew from the Navy. He told Perez there was an incident with Evans, but was stopped by Perez, who felt he would be required to become involved if he heard the details. So Sergeant Perez instructed Dorner to report the incident to higher-ups and informed Dorner that if he did not report it to higher-ups, he would. Chris Dorner reported the excessive use of force he witnessed by Teresa Evans to Sergeant Donald Deming at the Harbor Division Police Station. Deming later testified that Dorner had tears in his eyes when he reported the incident. According to Sergeant Deming, he recalled Dorner saying, "I have something bad to talk to you about, something really bad." He told Sergeant Deming Evans kicked Gettler once in the face and twice in the left shoulder or nearby chest area. And Teresa Evans told him not to include the kicks in the arrest report. According to Deming, Dorner said, "Promise me you won't do anything." Sergeant Demings told Dorner, "No, Chris, I have to do something." And looking over articles that wrote about the events leading up to Dorner's termination with the LAPD and the eventual manhunt, here's what happened. There was a Board of Rights review into the allegations of excessive use of force by Teresa Evans. She was placed on desk duty during the 7-month period it took to investigate and conclude the complaint. The review board was made up of 2 active LAPD captains and a criminal defense attorney. Witnesses were called to testify at the BOR hearing. 2 hotel employees said they did not see Evans kick Gettler. A port officer testified that he did not see Evans kick Gettler either, but portions of his testimony contradicted photographs from the scene. For instance, he recalled telling Dorner to fix his tie, but a photograph from the scene showed that Dorner was not wearing a tie. They heard about Gettler being treated for injuries to his face at the police station. However, they claimed Gettler did not say the injuries came from being kicked by an officer. Richard Gettler, Christopher Gettler's father, testified that his son told him that he was kicked in the face by a female officer that day. Although the short interview was played of Christopher Gettler when he was interviewed in the office of Dorner's attorney, Randall QUAN, in advance of the hearing, it did not translate well when he was summoned for the hearing. Gettler had a difficult time responding to questions and provided answers that did not correspond to the questions that were asked.
2008, Monday, it is approximately 11:46 hours, and being interviewed and tape recorded with his permission is Christopher Gettler. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you about the police contact that you had with the at the DoubleTree Hotel. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember being taken into custody by the police?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Do you remember whether there was a struggle?
Mm-hmm.
And during that struggle, were you kicked in the face?
Mm-hmm.
You have to say yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember how many times you were kicked in the face?
Once.
Okay. And do you remember where you were kicked in the face?
Right here.
Okay. And do you remember who kicked you in the face?
An officer.
Do you remember what sex? Was it a male or female?
It was a female.
And do you remember whether they were white or black?
They were black, or almost black, I think. And I was almost white. So.
Do you remember whether the female had light color hair or dark hair?
She had darker hair. Her hair was was a lighter shade, darker.
Okay, but do you remember being kicked?
Yeah.
Okay, and how many times?
Once.
Okay, and where?
This side, I think. Yeah, this side.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to stop the tape, and it is approximately 11:48 hours. Christopher, thank you very much.
Okay.
I want to point out personnel records indicate that Teresa Evans was white and had blonde hair. According to transcripts from the December 2008 Board of Rights hearing, Dorner's attorney, Randall QUAN, agreed with the board that Dorner should have reported the kick sooner. But doing the right thing should be held primary over the timing of the complaint of excessive use of force. At some point, QUAN called the case against Dorner, quote unquote, very, very ugly. He was further quoted as saying, "This officer wasn't given a fair shake. In fact, what's happening here is this officer is being made a scapegoat." These are direct quotes. In his own defense, Christopher Dorner said he had not reported the kick because he was only asked what force was used, not what his partner had done. In addition, he feared retaliation because of his rookie status and the previous complaints he filed against colleagues from the academy, which sounds pretty plausible.
During the BOR, the department attempted to label me unsuccessfully as a bully. They stated that I had bullied a recruit, Abraham Skeffers, in the academy when in reality an unfounded disposition from the official 1.28 formal complaint investigation found that I was the one who stood up for Abraham Skeffers when other recruits sang Nazi Hitler youth songs about burning Jewish ghettos in World War II Germany where his father was a survivor of a concentration camp. How fucking dare you attempt to label me with such a nasty, vile word? I ask that all earnest journalists investigating this story ask, Officer Abraham Skeffers about the incident when Officer Bertios began singing a Nazi youth song about burning Jewish ghettos. The internal affairs investigation in the academy involving Skeffers was spurned by a complaint that I had initiated toward two fellow recruit/officers. While on a assigned patrol footbeat in Hollywood Division, officers Hermilio Burridios IV and Marlon Magana both current LAPD officers, decided that they would voice their personal feelings about the black community. While traveling back to the station in a 12-passenger van, I heard Magana refer to another individual as a nigger. I wasn't sure if I heard correctly, as there were many conversations in the van that was compiled of at least 8 officers, and he was sitting in the very rear and me in the very front. Even with the multiple conversations and ambient noise, I heard Officer Magana call an individual a nigger again. Now that I had confirmed it, I told Magana not to use that word again. I explained that it was a well-known offensive word that should not be used by anyone. 3. He replied, "I'll say it when I want." Officer Bertios, a friend of his, also stated that he would say nigger when he wanted. At that point, I jumped over my front passenger seat and 2 other officers, where I placed my hands around Bertios' neck and squeezed. I stated to Bertios, "Don't fucking say that." At that point, there was pushing and shoving, and we were separated by several other officers. What I should have done was put a Winchester Ranger SXD 9mm 147 grain bullet in his skull and Officer Magana's skull. The situation would have been resolved immediately. The sad thing about this incident was that when Detective Ty from Internal Affairs investigated this incident, only one officer, unknown, in the van other than myself had statements consistent with what actually happened. The other 6 officers, John Carey, Gary Parker, Jacob Wax, Abraham Skeffers, and names I have forgotten, all stated they heard nothing and saw nothing. Shame on every one of you. Shame on Detective Ty, same ethnicity as Bertios, for creating a separate 1.28 formal complaint against me. Skeffers' complaint in retaliation for initiating the complaint against Bertios and Magana. Don't retaliate against honest officers for breaking your so-called blue line.
Imagine bringing a complaint against armed co-workers that are also responsible for helping you stay alive while combating crime. According to the Los Angeles Times, Teresa Evans later told Internal Affairs investigators that Dorner confessed to her on the first day that they worked together that he was unhappy with the way the LAPD handled a complaint he made against some of his classmates in the academy. She reported that Dorner believed the LAPD was a racist organization and told Evans he planned to sue the department at the end of his probation period. Evans also remarked that Dorner repeatedly made mistakes in the field. In one incident, Evans said they responded to a report of an armed man, and Dorner stood in the middle of the street to confront the suspect without any cover. She told Dorner that she would recommend he be removed from the field unless he improved his performance. Chris Dorner repeatedly requested more training after his return from a 13-month deployment in Bahrain, but the department did not grant his request. Evans told investigators on one occasion Dorner cried in the patrol car with her and insisted he needed additional training. I found it noteworthy that Teresa Evans said during the hearing Dorner told her the department was a racist organization, and she reported this to a supervisor. That supervisor denied that Evans reported this to her. A question that I pondered at this point in my research was, if Evans was caught lying in the hearing, why was it hard for the board to believe she might also be lying about kicking Christopher Gettler? This is more and more coming down to credibility of witnesses. In 2009, the review concluded the 3 board members, which were chaired by Captain Philip Tengerides, along with Captain Justin Eisenberg and City Attorney Timothy Martella, unanimously ruled against Dorner. The board concluded that Dorner was not telling the truth and made up the allegations of excessive use of force. They thought Richard Gettler was not credible. Christopher Gettler was too mentally ill, and that Dorner's timing for reporting the incident was triggered by the unsatisfactory evaluation by Evans and his fear of losing his job and career in law enforcement. Dorner was charged with making false statements and a false personnel complaint, and his employment with the LAPD was terminated. The way the board members dismissed Christopher Dorner's accounts of events and testimony from Christopher Gettler and his father, Richard Gettler, reminded me of the death of Elijah McClain in Aurora, Colorado, where police and paramedics were responsible for his death. Gettler, like McClain, was a vulnerable adult. If police do not believe them when they make statements or when they, tell people that they were injured or hurt, how can we keep those type of people safe? Under what circumstances will they be believed and protected? I know we now have more police wearing body cameras, so that helps with investigations. But it stood out to me because in learning about the life of Dorner, I never read about family members or colleagues or friends or supervisors saying he was a liar or that he was not trustworthy. In fact, the high-level security clearance in the military speaks volumes, you would think, about his character. I am sharing this reasoning because I hold close the idea that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. I understand that humans are complex beings, but the same is true of systematic racism and fraternal orders that do not want to be exposed or changed. And let's be honest, this would not be the first time a whistleblower is made the scapegoat and permanently silenced. On October the 3rd, 2011, Dorner filed an appeal with the Los Angeles County Superior Court. Judge David P. Yaffe presided over the case. Judge Yaffe said he was uncertain whether the training officer kicked the suspect or not. Therefore, he was compelled to uphold the department's decision to fire Dorner. The court claimed Christopher Dorner, number one, failed to meet the burden of establishing that the administrative findings of the Board of Review were contrary to the weight of the evidence. 2, he rejected Dorner's assertion that the board shifted the burden of proof by requiring him to prove Teresa Evans kicked Christopher Gettler. 3, he rejected Dorner's assertion that the Board of Review members were biased. And number 4, the court iterated that no other witness testified that Sergeant Evans kicked Gettler and that the issue rested on the credibility of Dorner and Evans. The court denied Dorner's appeal and judged in favor of the LAPD Board of Review. On February 1st, 2013, Christopher Dorner was honorably discharged from the Navy Reserve with the rank of lieutenant, which seems to be as a result of his termination from the LAPD. The same day, CNN journalist Anderson Cooper received a DVD that outlined Christopher Dorner's case against the Los Angeles Police Department. Included with it was a challenge coin with 3 bullet holes through it. The coin was issued by former LAPD Chief William Bratton. A handwritten message accompanied it that said, "Thanks, but no thanks, Will Bratton." In addition, the abbreviation 1MOA was inscribed, which means 1 minute of angle. Personally, I had to do a little research, but gun experts will know this amounts to letting it be known he has an accurate and lethal aim with the rifle. On February the 3rd of 2013 in Irvine, California, Monica QUAN and Keith Lawrence were shot dead while sitting in Lawrence's white Kia Optima in the parking lot of their apartment complex. Monica QUAN was the daughter of former LAPD Captain Randall QUAN. Keith Lawrence was her fiance and a police officer. Remember, Randall QUAN represented Dorner at the Board of Review hearing. On February 4th, 2013, Dorner posted a lengthy post on Facebook which detailed his grievances with the LAPD. In it, he also wrote about his childhood, military career, and training, and even his opinions on politics, controversial social debates, and his favorite actors and comedians. It was like he was eulogizing himself or making sure his side of the story would become public record for others to weigh in and understand what motivated his actions. He was adamant about clearing his name and reputation.
From Christopher Jordan Dorner /7648 to America SUBJ. Last resort regarding CF hashtag 07-004281. I know most of you who personally know me are in disbelief to hear from media reports that I am suspected of committing such horrendous murders and have taken drastic and shocking actions in the last couple of days. You are saying to yourself that this is completely out of character of the man you knew, who always wore a smile wherever he was seen. I know I will be vilified by the LAPD and the media. Unfortunately, this is a necessary evil that I do not enjoy but must partake and complete for substantial change to occur within the LAPD and reclaim my name. The department has not changed since the Rampart and Rodney King days. It has gotten worse. The consent decree should never have been lifted. The only thing that has evolved from the consent decree is those officers involved in the Rampart scandal and Rodney King incidents have since promoted to supervisor, commanders, and command staff and executive positions. The question is, what would you do to clear your name? Name, a word or set of words by which a person, animal, place, or thing is known, addressed, or referred to. Name synonyms: reputation, title, appellation, denomination, repute. A name is more than just a noun, verb, or adjective. It's your life, your legacy, your journey, sacrifices, and everything you've worked hard for every day of your life as an adolescent, young adult, and adult. Don't let anybody tarnish it when you know you've lived up to your own set of ethics and personal ethos. In August 2007, I reported an officer, Teresa Evans / now a sergeant, for kicking a suspect, excessive force, during a use of force while I was assigned as a patrol officer at LAPD's Harbor Division. While cuffing the suspect, Christopher Gettler, Evans kicked the suspect twice in the chest and once in the face. The kick to the face left a visible injury on the left cheek below the eye. Unfortunately, after reporting it to supervisors and investigated by PSB, Internal Affairs Investigator, Detective Villanueva / Gallegos, nothing was done. I had broken their supposed blue line. Unfortunately, it's not just us, it's justice. In fact, 10 months later on June 25, 2008, after already successfully completing probation, acquiring a basic post certificate and intermediate post certificate, I was relieved of duty by the LAPD while assigned to patrol at Southwest Division. It is clear as day that the department retaliated toward me for reporting Evans for kicking Mr. Christopher Gettler. The department stated that I had lied and made up the report that Evans had kicked the suspect. I later went to a Board of Rights department hearing for decision of continued employment from October 2008 to January 2009. During this BOR hearing, a video was played for the BOR panel where Christopher Gettler stated that he was indeed kicked by Officer Evans, video sent to multiple news agencies. In addition to Christopher Gettler stating he was kicked, his father, Richard Gettler, also stated that his son had stated he was kicked by an officer when he was arrested after being released from custody. This was all presented for the department at the BOR hearing. They still found me guilty and terminated me. What they didn't mention was that the BOR panel made up of Captain Phil Tingerides, Captain Justin Eisenberg, and City Attorney Martella had a significant problem from the time the board was assembled. Captain Phil Tingerides was a personal friend of Teresa Evans from when he was her supervisor at Harbor Station. That is a clear conflict of interest, and I made my argument for his removal early and was denied. The advocate for the LAPD BOR was Sergeant Anderson. Anderson also had a conflict of interest as she was Evans' friend and former partner from Harbor Division where they both worked patrol together. I made my argument for her removal when I discovered her relation to Evans, and it was denied.
Because he held the LAPD responsible for many recent losses in his life, he wrote, "I will bring unconventional and asymmetrical warfare to those in LAPD uniform, whether on or off duty." That post became known as Dorner's Manifesto. 2 days later, on February 6, 2013, Irvine police named Dorner as the prime suspect in the murders of Monica QUAN and Keith Lawrence, primarily based upon Randall QUAN being named as a high-value target in Dorner's manifesto. He blamed Randall QUAN for failing to properly represent him at the BOR hearing. As an objective fact finder on this case, it is strange that the BOR hearing included 3 LAPD captains. Naturally, agents of an organization are there to protect the interests of that organization. LAPD's racist and tarnished reputation greatly tipped the scales on public opinions. Like the action hero John Rambo in the movie First Blood, many people believe Dorner's assertions about LAPD. With a long history of institutional racism, discrimination, and abuse of citizens they were supposed to protect and serve, it was not surprising that at some point someone would push back. As Dorner wrote in his manifesto, he had broke their supposed blue line. As much as Dorner made LAPD a target, the LAPD had in turn made Christopher Dorner an enemy of the state and America's most wanted. Dorner's manifesto spilled all the secrets on how officers view citizen deaths and tragedies. His words fell on some public ears like a whistleblower, not a villain. In fact, it made Dorner something like a sympathetic hero on a mission to banish the corrupt dangers around us, like something out of a Marvel or DC comic book. And
don't honor these fallen officers / dirtbags. When your family members die, they just see you as extra overtime at a crime scene and at a perimeter. Why would you value their lives when they clearly don't value yours or your family members' lives? I've heard many officers who state they see dead victims as ATVs, wave runners, RVs, and new clothes for their kids. Why would you shed a tear for them when they in return crack a smile for your loss because of the impending extra money they will receive in their next paycheck for sitting at your loved one's crime scene of 6 hours because of the overtime they will accrue? They take photos of your loved one's recently deceased bodies with their cell phones and play a game of who has the most graphic dead body of the night with officers from other divisions. This isn't just the 20-something-year-old officers. This is the 50-year-old officers with significant time on the job as well who participate.
At 1 a.m. on February 7th of 2013, the hunt for Christopher Dorner turned up when Lee McDaniel recognized Dorner at a gas station south of Corona, California. McDaniel flagged down 2 LAPD officers on their way to provide security detail to one of the people named in Dorner's manifesto. The officers followed as Dorner's gray Nissan Titan drove onto northbound 15 freeway. At 1:20 a.m., Dorner exits at Magnolia Avenue, then opens fire on the officers. One officer was grazed in the forehead, and their patrol car was immobilized. Due to their radio being out of range, the officers had to borrow a cell phone from a motorist to call 911. At 1:33 a.m., officers Andrew Takias and Michael CRAIN of the neighboring Riverside Police Department were stopped at a red light at Arlington and Magnolia Avenue. Dorner fired into the vehicle, hitting both officers. Officer Michael Crane dies of his injuries, and Officer Andrew Takias was severely wounded. Chris Dorner remained true to his plan to strategically target police, not civilians. Unlike other mass shootings, we see evidence of Dorner holding true to his personal ethos and vendetta against police. According to an affidavit by the U.S. Marshals, around 3 a.m., a man matching Dorner's description attempted to steal a boat in San Diego. The boat's captain said he was subdued and told he would be able to retrieve the boat in Mexico. At some point, the bowline tangled in the propeller, which resulted in Dorner fleeing. There's a lot to criticize about the documentary titled The Manhunt for Cop Killer Christopher Dorner, presented on YouTube by a channel named True Lives. But I will just say, it served to magnify how utterly different the world is viewed depending on your position and experiences. You need only scroll down to the comments section under the video to see how the public viewed Dorner's actions and how greatly it contrasted with the narrative in the documentary and the narrative often told by mainstream media outlets about Dorner. Besides glossing over the events that sparked the war between Christopher Dorner and the Los Angeles Police Department, the documentary did not speak of the innocent citizens caught up in the panic and incompetence of LAPD officers that pursued Christopher Dorner. Around 5:30 a.m., mother and daughter, Emma Hernandez, 71, and Margie Carranza, 47, were delivering newspapers in the 19,500 block of Red Beam Street in Torrance, California. 8 police officers assigned to provide protection detail to one of the targets named in Dorner's manifesto opened fire on their blue Toyota Tacoma. Emma Hernandez was shot twice in the back while trying to protect her daughter, who suffered an injury to her hand. It was determined that 102 rounds were fired into their truck, and they never received any verbal warnings from police prior to them opening fire on their vehicle. The police just opened fire up on them. And to make matters worse, none of the officers involved in that shooting on 2 unarmed women, 2 citizens they were supposed to protect and serve, 2 people simply out doing their job. None of those officers were charged in spite of Emma and Margie, and the truck not even closely matching the description of Christopher Dorner or the vehicle that Dorner was last spotted in. The 2 victims were later awarded $4.2 million. I doubt that money can fix the kind of emotional trauma that came from being shot by police without warning or provocation. But that's not all. 25 minutes later, David Perdue, a 39-year-old white male, was headed to the beach to go surfing when his black Honda Ridgeline was rammed by a Torrance police vehicle with officers Brian McGee and Aaron Super inside. This occurred at Flagler Lane and Burrell Street. 3 bullets were fired through Perdue's windshield, but missed striking him. Although Dorner's truck was described as a 2005 gray Nissan Titan, police initially claimed David Perdue's truck, a black Honda Ridgeline, matched the description. After some contention over the settlement amount, the city settled with Perdue for $1.8 million. So you see, this is adding up. Now, we're still in the morning hours of February 7th of 2013, when at 9:38 a.m., Chris Dorner's Nissan Titan was found by Daniel McGowan. The truck was found burning on a service road near Big Bear Lake, which is approximately 80 miles from Los Angeles. The axle was broken, and police allegedly found rifles and camping gear inside. Over 100 officers surrounded the area and went door to door in search of Christopher Dorner. On February 9th of 2013, LAPD Chief Charles Beck announced he would review the evidence in Christopher Dorner's disciplinary case that led to his termination from the Los Angeles Police Department in 2008. Beck said, "I do this not to appease a murderer. I do it to reassure the public that their police department is transparent and fair in all the things we do." To the surprise of LAPD, public sentiment did not automatically pick sides in this conflict between Dorner and LAPD. Whether or not people felt comfortable speaking publicly or not, They found Dorner's accusations against LAPD plausible and wanted a fair and transparent investigation. LAPD has a reputation and past marred by accusations of excessive use of force against minorities and racist internal and external practices that have more than once resulted in riots. The next day, on February 10th of 2013, a $1 million reward was announced for information leading to the capture of Christopher Dorner. On February 12th of 2013, around noon, Karen and Jim Reynolds, the owners of the Mountain Vista Resort on Club View Drive in Big Bear, went into condo 203, where they found Dorner. It appeared that he had been inside the unit for some time. Dorner promised he would not hurt them, but Dorner tied them up and fled in their SUV. Karen Reynolds eventually freed herself and then called 911. Shortly after, sheriff's deputies, along with fish and wildlife wardens, spotted the Reynolds maroon Nissan headed down Highway 38. Fish and wildlife wardens chased the SUV until Dorner turned onto Glass Road. Dorner managed to get away from the wardens but crashed into a snowbank. He abandoned the vehicle where a silenced sniper rifle was found in the back seat. Approximately 15 minutes later, at 1 p.m., Dorner pointed a rifle at Rick Heltebrake and calmly asked for his white Dodge pickup truck. Heltebrake was not harmed. Here's how he described the moment he encountered Dorner.
While officers Simons and Medici continued to pursue Dorner, unsuspecting local resident Rick Heltebrake would be confronted by the most wanted man in America.
Right about in here, I see a crashed car, and then I see Dorner coming out of the snowbank right there, right at me. I remember him coming at me. I remember the vest. He had a big ballistics vest on with pockets in it. He's got a gun right at my head. I could tell it was some kind of assault rifle. I go like this, put my truck in park. He says, "I don't want to hurt you. Just get out and start walking." I had that sense that I wasn't one of his targets. You know, he wanted to kill cops, and I wasn't a cop. I left the truck roughly in this position right here. I got up and I started walking up the road. You realize you just got confronted by the most wanted man in America, and, he let me go.
Sometimes humans feel a need to prove they are the dominant race of a species, and they inadvertently take kindness for weakness from another individual. You chose wrong. Terminating officers because they expose a culture of lying, racism from the academy, and excessive use of force will immediately change. PSB cannot police their own, and that has been proven. The blue line will forever be severed, and a cultural change will be implanted. You have awoken a sleeping giant. I am here to change and make policy. The culture of LAPD versus the community and honest/good officers needs to and will change. I am here to correct and calibrate your moral compasses to true north. Those officers who join South Bureau Divisions 77th, SW, SE, and Harbor with the sole intent to victimize minorities who are uneducated and unaware of criminal law, and civil rights. You prefer the South Bureau because a use of force/deadly force is likely, and the individual you use UF on will likely not report it. You are a high-value target. Those black officers in supervisory ranks and pay grades who stay in South Bureau, even though you live in the Valley or OC, for the sole intent of getting retribution towards subordinate Caucasian officers for the pain and hostile work environment their elders inflicted on you as probationers, P1s, and novice P2s. You are a high-value target. You perpetuated the cycle of racism in the department as well. You breed a new generation of bigoted Caucasian officers when you belittle them and treat them unfairly. Those Hispanic officers who victimize their own ethnicity because they are new immigrants to this country and are unaware of their civil rights. You call them wetbacks to their face and demean them in front of fellow officers of different ethnicities so that you will receive some sort of acceptance from your colleagues. I'm not impressed. Most likely, your parents or grandparents were immigrants at one time, but you have forgotten that. You are a high-value target. Those lesbian officers in supervising positions who go to work day in, day out, with the sole intent of attempting to prove your misandrist authority, not feminism, to degrade male officers. You are a high-value target. Those Asian officers who stand by and observe everything I previously mentioned other officers participate in on a daily basis, but you say nothing, stand for nothing, and protect nothing. Why? Because of your usual saying, I don't like conflict. You are a high-value target as well. Those of you who go along to get along have no backbone and destroy the foundation of courage. You are the enablers of those who are guilty of misconduct. You are just as guilty as those who break the code of ethics and oath you swore. Citizens/non-combatants, do not render medical aid to downed officers/enemy combatants. They would not do the same for you. They will let you bleed out just so they can brag to other officers that they had a 187 caper the other day and can't wait to accrue the overtime in future court subpoenas. As they always say, that's the paramedic's job, not mine. Let the balance of loss of life take place. Sometimes a reset needs to occur.
Dorner left Helter Brake's truck in a ravine. Fish and wildlife officers were the first to spot the vehicle and recognize Dorner as the driver. Officers from numerous agencies chased Dorner to a cabin near Big Bear Lake. By 1:25 p.m., Dorner was in a gunfight with police and ambushed Deputy Alex Collins and Detective Jeremiah MACKAY. MACKAY was instantly killed, while Collins was critically injured. MACKAY was a 14-year veteran of the department and a department firearms instructor. This was the official start of the standoff between Chris Dorner and San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. Police surrounded the cabin and waited for Dorner to exit. Deputies in an armored vehicle threw canisters of tear gas into the cabin. Police allegedly thought tear gas would force Dorner out. They also ordered him to surrender over loudspeakers, but Dorner didn't come out. At some point, police commanded a demolition vehicle to knock down most of the walls of the cabin. Minutes later, police fired pyrotechnic tear gas canisters into the cabin. Those gas canisters are known as burners because they notoriously cause fires. By 4:20 p.m., the cabin was on fire and quickly became consumed by flames. From the flames, a single gunshot was heard. Police nor fire personnel made any effort to extinguish the fire. The department later claimed that they did not attempt entry or rescue due to the possibility of danger from explosives thought to be inside with Dorner. Kind of reminds you of what happened in Waco, Texas with the Branch Davidians, doesn't it? David Koresh, remember that? Yet another accidental fire, which was sparked by authorities. On February 14, 2013, medical examiners confirmed the identity of the remains found in the charred and burned out cabin was those of Christopher Jordan Dorner. Dental records were required to make the identification. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department announced it the next day, on February 15, 2013. Dorner died from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The manhunt was over, and 4 people were dead. This officially concludes the story of the person I'm referring to as Black Rambo, the man who kicked off the longest manhunt in Los Angeles, California history. This is the part of the video where I want to share my commentary on Dorner and this entirely tragic series of events First, I have to say it loud and clear. I do not support taking lives. Period. Full stop. Deletes period. Inserts a comma. Except where through a person's actions, they earn such an ending. You heard Dorner's mother. Chris knew how this would end when he set out on this mission to change the internal workings of the Los Angeles Police Department and to regain, quote unquote, his name. I'm keeping the same energy about Dorner that I have about other cases I featured on this channel. I do not like violence because I am a lover of peace. But this story is complicated in my sight. And that's why I have decided to focus my commentary on the event that caused all of this, which was Teresa Evans allegedly using excessive force on a mentally ill, vulnerable adult. We can't lose focus of that in these narratives that are painted where the LAPD and those writing about it want you to remember the reaction, not the provocation and injustice that sparked this. When I read over the information that is publicly available on how the Board of Review came to their conclusion, which was that Dorner was lying and merely acting out because he received a criticism of his performance. Teresa Evans was busted lying during the BOR when she claimed to have reported to her supervisor that Dorner said LAPD was a racist organization. That supervisor refuted her and said that never happened. It was not reported to her. If we are taking all things on face value, that should have damaged her credibility. So let's toss her out. Chris Gettler said on video that he was kicked in the face by a female officer. The details are there, but may be considered a little unclear or unsure due to his mental health challenges. So let's toss him aside. His father, Richard Gettler, received direct information from Chris, so let's toss his testimony out too. On to the hotel personnel. I believe there were 2 witnesses who were called who all said they did not see this alleged contact between Evans and Gettler. So they didn't see Evans abuse or use excessive force. So let's toss them out. On the other hand, Christopher Dorner, who was a direct witness, he provides clear and concise details. He made the complaint, was the one closest to both the victim and the alleged officer or offender. But there's questions about the timing of his complaint. His complaint was received 2 weeks after the event and only after receiving a poor performance evaluation. So let's toss out his testimony too. Officer Hernandez, who arrived and testified that he told Dorner to fix his tie, was busted lying. Photo evidence from that day shows Dorner's uniform did not have a tie, so he was lying. Let's toss out his testimony. I never heard that there was CCV or security camera footage showing this event, so we do not have anything except human testimony to confirm or deny Dorner's claims. Oh wait, Gettler was injured. Police or a doctor treated him for injuries in the exact places identified by Dorner, which technically supports Dorner's claim and Christopher Gettler's testimony. That's physical evidence, which I believe has more weight to support any claim of a crime. I do not understand why, other than racism or an effort to blame the messenger revealing the problem over actually addressing the complaint. Y'all, it's completely smelling like a cover-up. I know a little about human resources, I think, and I can be an objective fact finder. I believe if the goal was to be fair and equitable, those in charge, those who stood judgment over the outcome, should have dropped the whole thing due to insufficient evidence on either side. When you base your decision on subjective testimony, which comes down to who you believe and that's it, it calls into question your entire process and makes a mockery of a pseudo-judicial process that is supposed to incentivize officers to uphold police policies and ethics. Anything less is a joke. I am saying that because if your goal is to be fair, I have no way of affirming who's lying or telling the truth, so no one should have suffered any consequences or punishment. Perhaps the complaint is included in the employee file as a way of seeing if future complaints are filed against that officer, but that's it. Nothing in me would have given Dorner the impression that I don't believe him, or I know for a fact what his intentions were when he filed the complaint, because there's no human way of knowing that. I think them making clear that they believe the white woman over the black man left Dorner feeling invalidated, which historically has been a problem, a long problem in this country. And here's the plot twist. When I analyze the situation, I think it is plausible, but not certain, that Dorner filed the complaint in response to his poor evaluation. But that does not mean he was lying. Two things can be true at the same time. And if the department's job is to protect citizens, they should have taken the complaint seriously regardless of timing. And remember, Dorner's attorney, the one who represented him at the BOR, Randall QUAN, he had the same feeling about that. It came up in his appeal that Dorner feared retaliation by LAPD. He said, due to having filed previous complaints against other officers from the academy, like when he was in training, he hesitated to make this an issue. And we have evidence of that. We have testimony by Sergeant Leonard Perez, who was a former Navy man himself. If you recall, Dorner went to him about it before officially reporting it. Perez, in a way, forced Dorner to report it to higher-ups by saying, if you don't report it, I will. Then we heard from Sergeant Donald Demings, who said Chris asked him outright not to essentially make a thing of it. And Demings said, no, Chris, I have to move this up, or something to that effect. So that's twice he was put on the ledge by people in higher rank over him, that he put trust in to handle the situation fairly and to give him guidance on how best to handle this. He expected them to protect his interests. There's clearly a large amount of trust here that Dorner put into the people and to the official reporting process. We have to put ourselves in Dorner's shoes, I think. Imagine how you would feel if all of your coworkers were armed and responsible for your safety at work. Would you feel safe reporting them for on-the-job crimes, especially when you know the blue line is a very real thing inside of police departments? The blue line is a fraternal order like joining a gang, the military, a fraternity, or the damn mob. People pledge allegiance to this code of secrecy and protection of its members. So I personally believe the department was negligent in how this whole situation was handled. I believe Dorner met a similar fate of most people that become whistleblowers against powerful and corrupt institutions and organizations. They do not seek to change. They seek to silence the one that wants to go public or inform others about these hidden internal practices. If LAPD decided to side with Teresa Evans out of fear of legal consequences by Christopher Geller, that certainly backfired. It backfired in that it sparked Dorner's declaration of war on LAPD. It cost 4 people their lives, which you can't put a dollar amount on. Other officers were seriously injured, like Alex Collins and Andrew Tachias, I don't know how to say his name. Innocent civilians were also harmed. LAPD had to pay out settlements. They had to pay to fix property that was damaged and destroyed. It cost the city millions of dollars. But the biggest price was that this manhunt went down as the longest manhunt in Los Angeles history, and it added another entry into LAPD's ongoing terrible history and reputation for all to research and learn about through the annals of time. So LAPD completely fumbled this whole situation, in my opinion. I do believe Christopher Dorner. I do not think he was a madman on a killing spree or a rampage like your average mass shooting. I do not believe he was a narcissist, a monster, a vigilante, or a liar. His over 11,000 word, 26-page manifesto was not the ramblings of a madman, as some believed. But it was definitely a final message from a man that knew his actions would cost him his life, and he felt that it was worth dying for. He acted in line with the likes of Nate Turner, the man who led a slave revolt and in the process took several lives, and that's how I see it. He's a modern-day justice fighter or real-life American hero, like John Rambo, except he's not a fictional character, and he's not white, and I'll pick up on that in a minute. Dorner was a service member. Service members are technically contract killers. I mean, let's be honest. When at war, there will be collateral damage, as known as quote-unquote casualties. And what are service members and citizens told when people with perhaps brown skin, different religions, different cultures in foreign lands end up getting themselves caught in the crosshairs of a U.S. service member's weapon? We say it was quote-unquote collateral damage. They quickly usher us with white usher board gloves on to focus on the greater good, focus on the mission at hand. It's usually liberation or some BS, but it is always covering for a more sinister agenda. So if you wonder why I see Dorner as an American hero, it is because what he did for those 9 or 10 days was completely made in America. Dorner's mission was accomplished. He exposed LAPD. His message or manifesto is made available to the public, and I believe Dorner's name was restored. Many of us, in fact, thousands, believe Dorner. They believed him then, and they believe him now. That's why I think it is important to chime in and tell our own stories. And clearly, Christopher Dorner thought the same.
I had worked patrol at LAPD's Harbor Division from February 2006 until July 2006, when I was involuntarily recalled back to active duty U.S. Navy for a 12-month mobilization/deployment to CENTCOM in support of OIF/OEF. I returned back to LAPD's Harbor Division in July 2007 and immediately returned to patrol. I worked at Harbor Division until November 2007, where I then transferred to Southwest Division. I worked at Southwest Division until June 25, 2008, when I was relieved of duty. I have exhausted all available means at obtaining my name back. I have attempted all legal court efforts within appeals at the Superior Courts and California Appellate Courts. This is my last resort. The LAPD has suppressed the truth, and it has now led to deadly consequences. The LAPD's actions have cost me my law enforcement career that began on February 7, 2005 and ended on January 2, 2009. They cost me my naval career, which started April 2002 and ended February 2013. I had a TS/SCI clearance, top secret sensitive compartmentalized information clearance, up until shortly after my termination with LAPD. This is the highest clearance a service member can attain other than a Yankee White TS/SCI, which is only granted for those working with and around the President/Vice President of the United States. I lost my position as a commanding officer of a Naval Security Forces Reserve Unit at NAS Fallon. Because of the LAPD, I've lost a relationship with my mother and sister because of the LAPD. I've lost a relationship with close friends because of the LAPD. In essence, I've lost everything because the LAPD took my name and knew I was innocent. Captain Phil Tingerides, Justin Eisenberg, Martella, Randy QUAN, and Sergeant Anderson all knew I was innocent but decided to terminate me so they could continue Teresa Evans' career. I know about the meeting between all of you where Evans' attorney, Rico, confessed that she kicked Christopher Gettler, excessive force. Your day has come. I'm not an aspiring rapper. I'm not a gang member. I'm not a dope dealer. I don't have multiple babies' mamas. I am an American by choice. I am a son. I am a brother. I am a military service member. I am a man who has lost complete faith in the system when the system betrayed, slandered, and libeled me. I lived a good life, and though not a religious man, I always stuck to my own personal code of ethics, ethos, and always stuck to my shoreline and true north. I didn't need the U.S. Navy to instill honor, courage, and commitment in me, but I thank them for reinforcing it. It's in my DNA. Luckily, I don't have to live every day like most of you, concerned if the misconduct you were a part of is going to be discovered, looking over your shoulder, scurrying at every phone call from internal affairs or from the captain's office, wondering if that is the day PSB comes after you for the suspects you struck when they were cuffed months/years ago, or that $500 you pocketed from the narcotics dealer, or when the other guys on your watch beat a transient nearly to death and you never reported the UF to the supervisor. No, I don't have that concern. I stood up for what was right, but unfortunately have dealt with the repercussions of doing the right thing and now losing my name and everything I ever stood for. You fuckers knew Evans was guilty of kicking, excessive force, Gettler, and you did nothing but get rid of what you saw as the problem, the whistleblower. Gettler himself stated on videotape, provided for the BOR and in transcripts, he was kicked, and even his father stated that his son said he was kicked by Evans when he was released from custody. The video was played for the entire BOR to hear. Tingerides, Eisenberg, and Martella all heard it. You're going to see what a whistleblower can do when you take everything from him, especially his name.
I want to add some irony to an already wild story, and I guess it can be seen as another plot twist in this twisted tale. Teresa Evans, the white female officer that allegedly used excessive force against Christopher Gettler, you know, that mentally ill man that only Christopher Dorner seemed to hold any compassion for, she had the audacity to file a lawsuit for quote-unquote racial discrimination against the city of Los Angeles, basically the LAPD, about 2 years after all of this. I have no idea how that case ended, and I literally don't care. But I found it so ironic that she claimed she was made a scapegoat and discriminated against because she's white. And as a type of blowback, which resulted in her not being allowed to get a promotion to a sergeant too, and essentially made to feel like a pariah inside the department due to Christopher Dorner's manifesto. Y'all, she pulled a straight up reverse draw 4 on the LAPD. Now, didn't she? To be clear, I believe they alienated her, but they did it because they knew she did it. She started all this. She got people killed. And mind you, Dorner is responsible for killing people. I am giving him no pass on that. He actually suffered the consequences that I think he should have, which was if he didn't kill himself, I think that he should have been up for capital punishment. He should have suffered the consequences for his actions. Absolutely. No, you don't get the pass on that. They knew 4 people, 5 people if we include Dorner, they died because of Teresa Evans in my conspiracy theory. Allegedly. Wink, wink. When Dorner highlighted the fact that no criminal charges were brought against him for allegedly filing a false report, it was because LAPD knew the case would never hold up in criminal court. And I think Dorner was 100% right about that. Dorner should have been protected because he was technically a whistleblower. So when Facebook pages and protests popped up in 2013 in support of Dorner, I was not surprised by it. I strongly believe racism was a huge factor in Dorner not being believed and supported, even back to when the department refused him additional training after he returned from a 13-month deployment. I mean, this man was serving the country. Why would they deny him that? He was a decorated service member returning from service, which interrupted his training, and he was gone for like over a year. The institution would like us to focus on Dorner's response to an injustice, but want to fast forward past the racism and injustices that preceded it. My take on Dorner is that he was a man that held himself and others to high moral standards. He had a very naive and perhaps idealistic view of the world, in my opinion. But that does not make him crazy. That's why I don't believe he's the monster they tried to paint. He was like the Incredible Hulk. He was a regular man until he's provoked into becoming a one-man army on a mission to banish those he felt were the villains in his story. A narcissist or selfish man would not have bothered to address in his last message to the world how gun laws are too lax. Police brutality must be addressed. Racism of any sort is problematic. Children should be protected. He mentioned by name the Sandy Hook shooting. He called out corruption from things like Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman to Rampart and the Christopher Commission. Dorner made clear something has to change this corrupt institution called the Los Angeles Police Department. Please keep in mind that LAPD was left to investigate itself. I mean, say you're corrupt without saying you're corrupt. In what world has that ever worked? It's absurd to allow an institution with the dark and vile documented history of LAPD to investigate itself. That's wildly insane work. Dorner called that out. Dorner's review hearing was determined by 3 people, 2 LAPD captains and an attorney. And the lawyer appointed to represent Dorner, Randall QUAN, was formerly an LAPD captain. Like, huh? And to boot, that attorney from Dorner's BOR hearing is now a judge. So Dorner was right about how people who did terrible things are still employed by the city of Los Angeles and most of the time promoted to high-ranking positions after their crimes and criminal behavior. It's crazy work and a shock to the moral psyche. Like, what is the incentive to be a good person in a world, in an institution, in a department ran by multiple iterations of Dr. Evil? Can you imagine the cognitive dissonance it would cause? That alone could have been a tipping point, the powder keg inside of Dorner. Christopher Dorner delayed telling on Evans, and I even thought Evans may have given Dorner a poor evaluation to beat him to the punch. Do you remember how in the movie Training Day with Denzel Washington, he gave the rookie cop drugs just so that he could always have something to potentially use against him, should he ever cross him? Dorner spoke of this culture. He talked about how many cops are nervous thinking of the day they are called in by higher-ups because something they did in secret. Chris spoke of how they fear the light. He didn't fear it. He said because he stuck to his own moral code. Dorner was a man with top security clearance in the military, and he was a decorated service member, a lieutenant. I don't buy the madman narrative. Angry and fed up, yes, but not insane. Again, I can't possibly address all of the complex issues touched upon in this case, but I want to wrap up my commentary by bringing up something that none of the articles or videos I watched discussed, and that's the psychological damage done by racism and the real damage it does to a person's mental health, especially over time and with exposure after exposure. It did not come across any articles or statements or even documentaries that concluded that Dorner selected his targets based upon race. So although he acknowledged its terrible impact on him, it did not make him waver from his personal ethos that seemed to center on what he called his true north or his moral code. Dorner seemed to be a man that just wanted to be a regular American man. He wanted to protect and serve. That's clear from his career choices and path. But when he found out in the worst of ways that this place he believed in was still so utterly racist, flawed, and imperfect and unfair and unjust, it broke him. That world he believed in took everything from him that gave his life meaning. He admitted to not being a person of faith. So he placed his entire faith in himself, his code, and in his abilities. I personally think he placed too much belief in institutions that are unabashedly vile and corrupt. When LAPD terminated him in that manner, essentially calling him a conniving liar, it snowballed and affected his military service too. He was terminated from the Navy Reserves after that. In the Book of Human Logic 101, you can't leave a human like him helpless and hopeless. That's like leaving a person on self-destruct mode. I am not a psychologist and I don't play one on TV, but I know racism has a profoundly destructive impact. While researching this case, I read tone deaf, blind, clear agents of the system blabber on and on, spinning the same narrative that only wanted to address the reaction, not the provocation. And this is why a certain population never understood the riots, the formation of Black Lives Matter, or boiling tensions brewing just beneath the surface on any given day in America. And to those people, you can't handle the truth, or it simply isn't in you. People of color are walking around every day with untreated, invalidated PTSD brought on by a hostile environment. While I can't possibly speak for all Black or brown people, nor can I speak for Chris Dorner, I can only imagine how hard of a pill it is to swallow, though, when you attempt to seek justice through all legal means, only to have your hopes thwarted and your character as a principled man maligned and destroyed. What a smack in the face. Some humans are not the type to simply turn the other cheek. I cannot and will not vilify a person for believing they would rather be dead than to keep fighting what looks like an endless battle for common human dignity. Christopher Dorner said it himself. He said,
"It is endless the amount of times per week officers arrest an individual, label him a suspect, arrestee, defendant, and then before arraignment or trial realize that he is innocent based on evidence. You know what they say when they realize an innocent man just had his life turned upside down. I guess he should have stayed at home that day he was discovered walking down the street and matching the suspect's description. Oh well, he appeared to be a dirtbag anyways. Meanwhile, the falsely accused is left to pick up his life, get a new family, friends, and sense of self-worth."
it's not healthy to consistently receive messages that your life doesn't matter. And in that funky documentary by True Lives, his supposed friend said this.
I remember him telling me that he was the only African-American child in his class or in his neighborhood. He would regularly get beat up after school. There were, other bullies in the neighborhood who would give him a hard time. To hear him tell it was racially motivated. I met Chris Dorner in college. He and I played football together. He was clean-cut, articulate, pretty easy to get along with. He was approachable, good sense of humor. He wasn't somebody who was serious all the time. He'd laugh and smile and, was normal. I mean, he was a normal 19-year-old, 20-year-old guy. He was very conscious of how people treated him. I don't think that he was all that thrilled about our coaches on the football team. He commented to me that he thought that particular coach was racist.
Huh? Sir? What in the fuck do you mean by let him tell it? The nerve of this guy. These are the kinds of deaf ears Dorner dealt with. His poor mother tried to prepare him for this, but Dorner was just born with that programming he held for himself and others. Some will be lost in the weeds here because they take issue with Chris Dorner. So let me reach out a hand and pull you in. Here's a more palatable reporter on the harm I mentioned. This is tennis legend Arthur Ashe, who said, before we move on to Arthur Ashe, I just want to comment on just how sad it really is that this person called himself a friend of Dorner's, of Christopher Dorner's. And if you hear the word choices he chose and how to retell or talk about what Dorner was saying were his experiences. When somebody is supposed to be a friend of yours and you're saying, this happened to me, this is what I'm experiencing, and the person that you're talking to doesn't look like you, has no way of being like, oh yeah, I'm going through that too, because his entire world is different. His world is made up of the people who hate Chris and people who look like Chris, but he wouldn't feel all of that. But can you imagine somebody not even validating what you're trying to tell them is happening to you? And then you wonder why this became a powder keg and why let him report. Look, let him tell it. I'll say it with the same type of dismissiveness that he gave Chris, which is let him tell it like there is no racism, or, like he's making this up or imagining things. He went to school in Utah. Utah. Really? Like, I just think it's kind of weird that this documentary hunted down people to basically feed into the narrative that, like, oh, he was just making it up. There is no racism. Like, that whole thing is just like people telling you, it's like when people say, like, oh, the devil doesn't exist. Or no, it's worse than that, because actually the devil is like a concept that people can sit and argue about, right? Because it's supposed to be metaphysical or something we can't see, right? But racism is institutionalized. Racism is constructed. Racism is completely a social construct. And unfortunately, when you get to control the narrative, as they did in that documentary, and also as it is when you are currently the majority, okay, you get to tell the story. You get to be the one to say how things are, or to try to paint the reality that everybody else is supposed to accept. So that to me is like one of those moments of where I was just like, do you see how, if your whole life you are inundated with these experiences, these things are happening to you, and everybody keeps telling you it's not happening to you. And you know you're not crazy. You know that you're not just making stuff up. You know that you're not hypersensitive. You're like, I would love to wake up and not be a race, not be a part of, this thing that people just hate because you were born that way. Like, it's absolutely insane. And when people try to make it seem like, that's like when people say, I don't see color. You're not helping. That's not helpful at all. It's the stupidest thing ever. It's just ridiculous, because wait a minute, only way it makes sense is if you're blind. If you're blind, then okay, you get a pass. But if you're not blind and you think that you're making somebody feel better, or, oh, I'm massaging them and be like, I'm not a racist. No, that does not help anybody to be like, oh, I don't see you. No, you should be able to see people, and that shouldn't be what you judge them on. So it's better for you to be like, oh, I see race. I think races are different. They're beautiful. Or even if you don't like them, you can just be neutral. It's perfectly safe to, have a preference or not really care about, those things in a particular way, but just be and show up in the world neutral, not aligning yourself with, or as Chris was saying earlier, those people who just sit by and say nothing. I think the reason why I feel so passionate about it is because I've had my own experiences. Yes, I've had my own experiences, those moments where it was a moment for a person who doesn't look like you to stand in the gap, to actually be an advocate, and they don't. The same way they bailed out, he was standing up for this one. Remember, he was talking about the Jewish person who was also, a rookie like him, or, in training or in the academy. And when these guys were singing that Nazi song, Dorner was standing up for them. Dorner was standing up for him. Like, it is so, I just get it. That's all I can say. And the saddest thing, that's the reason why this story is so tragic to me. Mind you, as I said earlier, and I'm not going to keep on, reiterating that, I don't like seeing people get killed. But I also have this position to say about it, which is, imagine living in a place where Chris Dorner and people like him are vilified or made to be like, you're the problem, okay? He was crazy. He was a madman. Let's just dismiss the fact that the cops burned him alive, were judge, juror, and executioner, made zero effort to make sure that this person who was a whistleblower never ever, they ruined his career. They ruined his life. They took everything from him by doing that. And why? In order to protect the institutions that favor them, that help them to get money, help them to have access. It's just so systematic, and it's so entrenched, and it's so deeply rooted that you can see how a person could get tired of fighting. You know how they say fight the good fight? You can see how someone could grow tired, especially if you are not a person of faith. You have something bigger than you to make you feel strong. I just wish that Chris surrounded himself with better people. I wish that after all of this happened to him, that he just picked up his stuff and started over and found himself people, a community that would validate him, that would say, I know what you're talking about, that would basically be like, you know what? I know it's hard, but we can get through it together. That's the tragedy to me on a personal level. But everybody makes their choices, and I am not here to, let's say, overly, let's say sympathize with the fact that he could have made different choices. That is 100% true. But I think that with him self-reporting that he has severe depression, which I don't know if that was brought on by his military experience. It could have been just something that he has a propensity for. I'm not sure, but I know that it wasn't treated. And unfortunately, when people are going through things or having stuff, you just really wish that they had resources and tools, or the capacity to accept resources and tools. Because I have no doubt, that's why I said, I believe Chris Dorner. I believe every word that he said. I will always believe that he was an honest man who got railroaded and murdered. Yes, he did. And mind you, by the time he had committed those murders, all of us knew, who were keeping track of this case, how it was going to end. We knew it. You know what I'm saying? Everybody knew that they was never going to, or they had no desire to bring him in alive, even though they kept having press conferences just to make people believe that, oh no, we want nothing more than to bring him in alive. No, you don't. They do this all the time, especially if you go against a cop. Think about like how many times, like, you can't keep on repeating a behavior and then keep on telling people that, oh, it was an accident. You know, like I mentioned in the video, that whole thing about them putting those gas canisters that they knew would catch fire or cause a fire. They did that on purpose. And then they had the audacity, the nerve to actually get in front of a microphone and actually tell the media with all those cameras and recorders going that we didn't burn up the cabin on purpose. And then you heard them calling over the radio, burn it down. You see what I'm saying? So what I want to say is that be consistent with your energy. And that's the part that I have problems with. And the reason why it is inconsistent is because they're racist. That's it. Okay, so let me get back to where I was in my commentary. I just had to add that because I can't help thinking about how a whole movie was made about Chris Kyle. There's another Chris. I don't know what's up with Chris's, but whatever. But Chris Kyle, you know, the one who's famously known for the movie American Sniper, the one who bragged about how many brown people he killed overseas, somewhere in the Middle East, in Iraq. Yeah, that guy. And he's an American hero. But it's so funny how this guy, Chris Dorner, who had top security clearance in the military, and then it was just so many times the narration, like the in that documentary, it irked me so bad, because they kept on like using all these adjectives and painting this picture to try and make you not think about like the wrongs that they did too, the things that they did, the things that no one investigated, like telling somebody let's just say that you had a situation at your job and then they say, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. Now go and tell your job. What? That's what they're doing. That's what the LAPD did. They investigated themselves. He had no way. They gave him no outlet to actually have an objective person hear his case and review it and adjudicate it. So for those people that will probably come down or go down in the comments and why did you bring race into this? Why bring race into this? Just say you don't get it. That's all. And I'm not going to explain it. That's not my job to do that. It's not my job to educate in that way. This video was really like one of those ones where, again, I do crime and criminal behavior. This is definitely a crime, and there was a lot of criminal behavior, but it wasn't just on the part of Christopher Dorner. Okay, back to regularly scheduled programming. Now, this is from an article titled The Heaviest Burden, written by Jay Nordlinger. Yesterday, after I wrote my column, I had a memory of long ago. Arthur Ashe was dying of AIDS. This was in the early 1990s, and he told an interviewer that being black was harder than having AIDS. I was brought up short by this remark. Ashe was a celebrity, a star, a revered athlete, an American hero. Was being black so hard as that, even for him? By his own testimony, yes. Googling around, I found an excerpt from his autobiography I will paste. I had spent more than an hour talking in my office at home with the reporter for People magazine. Her editor had sent her to do a story about me and how I was coping with AIDS. The reporter's questions had been probing and yet respectful of my right to privacy. Now, our interview over, I was escorting her to the door. As she slipped on her coat, she fell silent. I could see that she was groping for the right words to express her sympathy for me before she left. Mr. Ashe, I guess this must be the heaviest burden you have ever had to bear, isn't it? She asked finally. I thought for a moment, but only a moment. No, it isn't. It's a burden, all right, but AIDS isn't the heaviest burden I have had to bear. Is there something worse? Your heart attack? I didn't want to detain her, but I let the door close with both of us still inside. You're not going to believe this, I said to her, but being black is the greatest burden I've ever had to bear. You can't mean that. No question about it. Race has always been my biggest burden. Having to live as a minority in America, even now, it continues to feel like an extra weight tied around me. I can still recall the surprise and perhaps even the hurt on her face. I may even have surprised myself because I simply had never thought of comparing the two conditions before. However, I stand by my remark. Race is, for me, a more onerous burden than AIDS. My disease is the result of biological factors over which we, thus far, have had no control. Racism, however, is entirely made by people, and therefore it hurts and inconveniences infinitely more. For context, Arthur Ashe suffered a heart attack and is believed to have contracted HIV from a blood transfusion during heart bypass surgery in 1983. So this is self-reporting from one of the best of us. It took me a long time to prepare this video because I see no point in pulling this painful event up from the ashes of the past if it doesn't serve a greater purpose today and usher in better understanding of how interconnected we all are through our actions, inactions, institutions, policies, and civic duties. We are one human family. If you've made it to this point in the video, you should stay and check out our Comments Cafe. When LAPD was shooting up vehicles that looked nothing like Dorner's, it was extremely frightening. I have to question the morals of the LAPD to put so many people at risk during this hunt. I don't know who was more dangerous. That blue pickup, just covered in bullet holes, blew my mind. I will never forget a reporter asking a black guy live on the streets of LA at the time of this all happening, "Are you afraid to walk the streets?" in a panicked, need for alarm type of way. The guy calmly told her, "No, he's not after me." All the while, police were doing news interviews from LAPD basement. Christopher Dorner is an American hero. Thank you for your service to our country, Mr. Dorner. I don't condone the murders he performed, but I understand the pain he endured. He did everything right with honor, only to be torn down to disgrace by doing the right thing. He worked so hard to be a great man. All of his training and anger made him a man on fire. I wish he was able to live a life of compliments and have been a great role model for young men. Rest in peace. Rule number 1, the official story is never the real story. The fact that this documentary left out the part that the police almost murdered 4 innocent people during this manhunt and had to pay out a combined $5 million for their incompetence is very telling. He was a failure and so on, but managed to have them running scared. He was a black man that was tired of the racism. He's a hero. He did something to show them he wasn't afraid and he was prepared to meet his fate. And they wasn't as big and bad as they thought they was. We need to hear from the people that loved him and that knew what was really going on, because this only showed how much they really hated him. Rest easy, King. The only people who were scared was the police. Chris wasn't after innocent civilians. He is a legend. No one is talking about his allegations in the manifesto. Guy was raised in a middle-income family, but that freak still feels the need to mention ghetto and say that his family was not very poor. Why was that necessary? Profiling at its best, and this one-sided documentary does very well continuing it. He was a monster, and his supporters here show that certain people really do put ideology over common sense. I have no sympathy for the LAPD. You reap what you sow, and the LAPD is one of the most corrupt law enforcement departments in the country. Let them deal with this. I know I won't report Dorner if I see him. Does anyone have any information on Evans? Since we can't trust the LAPD, or if the media refuses to look into the truth here. Not for Dorner's reputation, he shot that to hell with his actions, but to find out why LAPD decided to railroad him out of his life and then try to silence him. Fact. Whenever in your life you hear someone in management claim that a person is a disgruntled employee, take a close look at management. That phrase is the number one phrase that dishonest managers use to protect themselves. The second most common phrase used by dishonest managers is that a person is, quote unquote, not a team player. The translation, that person won't keep his mouth shut and keep quiet about illegal acts or other misconduct that management wishes to keep secret. Dorner seemed to have been a decent man until this killing spree. I am not apologizing his murders, especially not those of people unrelated to his court case. After having read the court files, I am just saying, imagine how he felt, a young black cop with a strong sense of justice who saw his white supervisor assaulting a man. He reported it and got fired in revenge. He fought in court and lost, appealed and lost again. I'm sad that he lost his mind over the injustice and became a psychotic killer. What gets me about Dorner is that he always has a big smile on his face. It all went downhill for him when he reported a fellow cop for abuse. Bet there's more to it all that we'll never know. A man like this doesn't just randomly go on a shooting spree. This story is a cover-up to something more diabolical. I love how they don't go into any of his grievances or experiences prior to everything. They just want to make him seem crazy for no reason.
Christopher Dorner, this is Charlie Sheen. You mentioned me in your manifesto, so thank you for your kind words. I am urging you to call me. Let's figure out together how to end this thing. Call me. I look forward to talking to you.
Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I appreciate you and welcome you to our growing community that I call the Crimisphere. I welcome you to consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps us out and pushes us up in the algorithm. Before you go, what are your thoughts on this case? Was Dorner lying? Do you disagree with me about something? Let me know in the comments. I look forward to bringing you more stories in a future video. Until our next conversation.